You want to take it away?
Okay, I will. Thank you, Connie. My name is Corinne Sylvia, and with me today is my business colleague, Connie Carter, and our other colleague, Chris Sipple, and we're going to be talking about strategic planning. I'm going to discuss what strategic planning is and why it's important, and then Connie and Chris will discuss how to create a strategic plan that is unique to your organization and its mission. What we'd like to do is leave all the questions. Someone needs to mute themselves. Thanks, that's great. We'd like to leave the questions until the end. If you would, that would be very helpful. Okay, so let's get started. So what is a strategic plan? Well, it's a roadmap or a guide that helps a nonprofit focus on future goals, how to develop effective strategies to achieve those goals, all within a defined time frame. The strategic plan allows a nonprofit to envision future initiatives and develop strategies and action steps to achieve those goals. It defines outcomes you wish to achieve and ways of measuring success for the priorities that matter to your organization. A good strategic plan includes long and short-term timelines for each goal and strategy. And it includes a budget to achieve the goals that require additional funding. This helps drive successful fundraising for the strategic plan as well, because research tells us that donors are more likely to support a thoughtful, well-designed plan, which positions your organization for fundraising success. So moving on to the process. What is the process like? Well, a successful process should include both members of the board and staff, because each brings a perspective that is vital to the planning process. And it also has the capacity to make the board and the staff a team that not only works together, but encourages their future buy-in when implementing the plan. And this is really important. When Connie and I were working with Alex's Lemonade Stand, there was at one point a sort of a distinct difference between the board and the staff and how they work together. And Connie was able to bring them together through the strategic planning process so that they talked to each other, they exchanged information, they got to know each other, and they got to work together as a team. And that's really important because you need both sides working on the strategic plan. Ideally, the process should begin with a survey of your organization's internal and external realities. This will help your organization clarify its internal strengths and weaknesses, which in turn will help you identify your opportunities and challenges. But the survey shouldn't be done in a vacuum. It's helpful to hire outside consultant to conduct a series of interviews with key constituencies, including, but not limited to, donors, community members, other nonprofits with similar mission and services to see what they're doing and how they're doing it, and other individuals who are significant organization and history. The information gathered from the survey may include perceptions of your organization in the community, including the good news and the bad news. It will include how the board and staff are perceived in the community. It will include how well the mission is understood within the community and what other services are needed that you might want to consider during the strategic planning process. All this informs your planning process and enables you to anticipate and proactively respond to new information and changes in the environment and the community in which you work. A successful strategic plan will focus on priorities that advance your mission. Today, most strategic plans are created for a 1 to 3 year time frame, but we have worked with nonprofits who are in transition, and they may need a 6-month time frame, or they may need a year or 2-year time frame. So it's not cast in stone. It's really important to remember that your strategic plan is a document that should reflect specific goals and time frame and what works best for your organization. So if a 2-year plan is best, fine. If a 3-year plan is best, fine. Let the work drive the process, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And while the strategic planning process is general in its scope, it focuses on broad, long-lasting issues that your organization needs to address. And it also shows your constituency, particularly your donors, that you embrace best practices, which is a really important factor when a donor makes a decision whether to fund or not fund you. May I have the next slide, please, Connie? Thank you. Okay, so what are some of the reasons that nonprofit boards decide to create a plan? There are all kinds of reasons. I'm going to give you a few, but when we get to the Q&A time, there may be more reasons that we'll want to bring up. So, for example, a young organization may be struggling to gain traction for its mission, and a strategic plan would help that organization take its mission to where it wants to be, to the next level. It could be that an organization may be addressing a critical issue, such as a need for more space, or a new program approach to services, or the organization may be at a critical juncture in the growth of the organization, which requires a thoughtful plan going forward, which may have an impact on how you staff, the programs that you provide, and other issues as well. Well, there may be environmental changes that affect how your organization provides services. For example, the pandemic has influenced all of us and how we conduct our work. And so Connie and I have seen a rise in nonprofit organizations that want to have a strategic plan to help them through the COVID process and on, because they have learned some things through that pandemic that really have affected how they want to proceed and what works and what doesn't. It could be that an organization had great momentum that was developed with the current plan, and they want to keep that momentum going. So they create another strategic plan that builds on the strength and what they learned in that last strategic plan. And last but not least, and you all know this, funders love strategic planning. Hire strategic planning with all of your grant submission packages. So before I turn this over to Connie, I want to invite you to remember that, above all, strategic planning is worthless without a strategic vision of what it is you want to achieve. So let's turn to Connie, and we'll discuss how to create a strategic plan.
All right. Thank you so much, Corrine.
Welcome.
All right. So I'm just going to talk about the various steps that you go through in actually building a plan. So first off, you want to get ready and you want to think about, might there be any other items that you'd like to gain, or any other concepts you'd like to achieve during the strategic planning process? There are many other benefits that you can gain from the strategic planning process other than just building a great plan. And as Corrine mentioned, one of the most obvious ones is it can improve communication and connection between the board and the staff. Because if you include the board and the staff, as Corrine suggested, it provides structured opportunities for them to share information with each other, learn from each other, and learn to appreciate each other's skills. It can also build and maintain, or even mend, relationships in the community. If you engage, as Corrine suggested, that process of gaining feedback from the community through some kind of a structured process, it can help to identify issues that may be out there that you may not know about, and it can help to strengthen relationships. It can also help you to cultivate new relationships, in particular with donors, or strengthen existing relationships with them as well. I can't tell you how many times I've experienced when I've been interviewing someone and they say, you know, I really respect that this organization is doing this, or I really appreciate that you guys are engaging in this community feedback and doing strategic planning. And so right there, just that process of the interview can help to elevate your organization in their esteem. So you want to think about if there are any other side goals you may have and try to build those into the process as well. And as Corrine mentioned, it's really important to build a strong, diverse team to work on the strategic plan. Because one of the things that I love about it is that it can bring together diverse new voices in a variety of different ways. And frankly, in strategic planning, really, diversity and inclusion are the key concepts. This is going to help you to create a strategic plan that's focused on the organization and its constituency, not just based on a few key voices. So you want to assemble a group that's going to include those people who are going to be responsible for implementing the plan, as Corrine noted. You certainly want the board and the staff. And if your organization has any key volunteers who are also very invested or involved in your work, you might want to include them. So that's basically thinking about that initial team. Who's going to be involved? Whose voice do we need to have? Third, you want to think about whether you need to use a consultant or not. And Chris is going to talk more about this later. But I just wanted to mention that it's very important that if you do decide to engage a consultant, that you find someone who has experience working in organizations of similar size and scope as yours. A strategic plan for a huge corporation or a hospital system is going to look very different than one for a small to moderate sized nonprofit organization. And the tasks are also going to be very different. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. So now that you've figured out who's going to be involved, you want to get everybody together and you want to think about what that structure might be. And Chris is going to talk about that a little bit more later as well. But one of the first things that you do is you review your mission and you update it perhaps. Maybe things have changed since it was originally developed. And the mission and the vision and the values are critically important foundational pieces to any strategic planning work. Because everything that you develop in the plan has to support and reflect and be congruent with that mission, vision, and values. So that's why square one, the first thing you want to do is get everyone on the same page and talk about those topics. It's really, really important. And then we do phase 3, which is, as Corrine noted, to assess our internal situation. Typically, there are all kinds of little devices you can use. You can use SWOT, you can use SOAR, you can use TOES. You know, there's all these acronyms out there, and don't let them drive you crazy. It's basically, where are we now? Where are our problems? Where might we want to go? And what might be some difficulties getting there? That's basically it. So don't let that freak you out. It's just, that's basically what we need to do. And that process will lay a really good foundation and groundwork for your future strategic planning work. And at that meeting also, you also want to review the community feedback if you did that phase of work. You also need to decide how to build the plan. Are you going to use full group meetings? Are you going to use committee meetings? How are you going to, what's your process going to look like? Personally, I like forming small subcommittees to work on each section of the plan simply because that reduces the number of long, big meetings that people need to go to, but it really depends on your organization's preferences. Some organizations want everybody involved in everything, and it's important to respect that. There's no one right way to do this. This really needs to fit you. So that's basically that step in terms of how to go about this in terms of getting ready. This slide sort of depicts what basically goes into a strategic plan, and we're going to talk about that. And you can see mission is here on the left because mission is fundamental. That drives everything. And then secondarily, you have your vision, your values, and your target markets, who we're serving. So reflecting, your next step is reflecting on that SWOT analysis or SOAR analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And SOAR stands for strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. So you can see it's all sort of the same thing. But you want to reflect on that information. You want to develop goals and action steps for each section of your plan. So typically, the sections of the plan for a nonprofit will be things like programs, as we have here, Program A, Program B, Program C. There'll typically be a section on marketing and outreach. There'll be one on fundraising for sure. There will be one probably about human resources and governance. And depending on what your organization is like, if you have a facility, for example, Good Fellowship Ambulance would certainly have a section on facilities because they have a building and a ton of equipment. So depending on what else you're doing and you need, you will adjust those sections to fit your work. As you're developing your goals, you want to keep them realistic yet challenging. You don't want to put so much into the plan that it feels overwhelming or impossible to do with the existing resources or even the resources you think you might be able to get. And as you have your strategic planning conversations, you want to think outside the box, but you don't want to be too far outside the box. You know, strategic planning does stimulate visionary creative thinking, which I think is one of the reasons that I love it so much. And it promotes considering new and sometimes even revolutionary ideas. However, it's really important that it be done within a framework of adhering to the organization's mission and acknowledging, again, what is realistic and attainable for you. Because the last thing you want to do is to create this humongous strategic plan that's just depressing to even look at because it's so far out of the scope of what you can do. And please try to remember that lofty, far-reaching goals that are vague and ambiguous are not going to be useful. That said, as you're having your conversations, you also want to avoid thwarting creative ideas with negativity or an attitude of, oh, we tried that 5 years ago and it didn't work, it's not going to work today. A program that maybe you couldn't get going 5 years ago might be possible today because of changes in the community or additional resources that you might have. As you craft your goals, you want to avoid vague, wide-ranging concepts like engage new constituencies, or because you're missing the who, the how, the when, and the what there. How many constituencies, who's going to do it, what's the time frame? Or something like strengthen and diversify funding resources. Again, you're missing the how and the what and the when. But if you, and how can you possibly determine if that goal has been satisfactorily reached? Did you get one? Oh, is that reaching the goal? You don't know. However, if you had a goal that said strengthen and diversify funding by increasing fundraising revenues and donors by 20% each year, that gives you a time frame and it gives you a measure that you can shoot for. You also want to be sure, and this is this far right-hand blue column, that you develop a tactical or implementation plan for each one of those goals. Strategic plans are team efforts, as I think we've probably communicated already. Staff, board, and committee members, and perhaps other volunteers are going to be responsible for implementing some of those goals. New committees may need to be formed, staff may grow, board members and personnel may change through the life of the strategic plan. So as a result, it's really important that you create a detailed tactical plan that includes specific measurable steps of what needs to be done, when, and by whom. That's that far right-hand column. So you want to create a plan that anybody could step in, read it over, and figure out what needs to be done next and how. Without that, your goals are just going to remain wishes or remain big picture thinking because there's no clear pathway to achieve them. So a successful plan is going to include accountability, how to manage the obstacles and setbacks, and where to find support. And as Corrine said, often if you put in a budget or an estimated cost for any of the items that you think will cost additional money, that is a hugely helpful confidence builder with donors and funders, because they see, oh, you're asking me for this money, but I see it's part of a larger plan that's been really thought through. So that really enhances your credibility. So it's a very useful step in terms of fundraising strategy. And then you want to implement the plan, which means monitor, evaluate, and update. Strategic plans are like plants. If you don't tend to them, sorry, Corrine, if you don't tend to them, they tend to fail. So the board should designate one or more board members to be responsible for monitoring their sections of the plan in collaboration with the executive director, who of course is responsible for monitoring the staff pieces of the plan. And if you have developed a detailed tactical plan, that's not going to be as challenging as it might seem. As board and staff quickly learn that they're going to be accountable for these things, your participation is going to increase. Paying attention to the flow of the tactical plan and when items need to be started and completed will help to keep it achievable and prevent frustration and burnout. Because the thing that gives strategic planning a bad name is people say, oh yeah, we did a great plan and it's sitting on the shelf. I mean, these days it's sitting in the computer. It's not in humongous binders on the shelf, but we never look at it. So you've got to build into this the accountability that you really intend. Now you've got this great plan, we're really committed to implementing it. And that, of course, takes oversight and attention. So my suggestions about how to make sure that this implementation happens is that that plan gets reviewed at least quarterly at board meetings and perhaps more often. You probably don't need to look at it if you meet monthly, you don't need to look at it every month, but at least every other month, that plan gets pulled out and you talk about what's going on. You need to review which items are due to be done. You want to celebrate the accomplishments and ask for accountability regarding any that have not been finished. Extending the due dates is always an option, provided there is discussion about where we're going to give you another 3 months to accomplish this or whatever. You want to also look at what items are going to be due in the next couple of months and who's going to be responsible. So it serves as a tickler here. By the way, you need to be working on this. And it also would give you an opportunity to discuss any additional resources, including time, that may be needed to accomplish a particular task. Because you may have developed the plan, say, in 2023, and you may be now looking at a goal that was scheduled for 2025, and things may have changed in the next couple of years. So you may need more resources, more help, or you may need to make some changes simply because time has gone by. And the executive director should report to the board on the status of the action steps that staff are responsible for. And lastly, you want to think about revising and updating your plan. When new opportunities arise, you can use the plan to help you determine if the new venture should be undertaken. Does it further the goals of the plan? Does it adhere to the mission? The plan can be a very helpful framework on which to help you make those decisions. This can be particularly helpful if an organization is young or going through a growth phase and multiple opportunities are coming up, or that your mission's really receiving traction and all kinds of people and organizations are coming to you and saying, hey, we want you to do this, we'd like you to do that. And you're like, well, we need to think about this. How does this fit in the plan? How does it fit our mission? And the strategic plan can be a very helpful tool for that. And it needs to be a living document. You want the living plant, So if situations change and you need to adjust the plan, you simply use the same thoughtful, inclusive process for that you did when you were building the plan. It's also helpful to annually review the status of the plan, to acknowledge the work that's been done, to encourage people to continue being involved, and to consider any upcoming tasks that may need to be adjusted, again, because circumstances may have changed. And now Chris is going to talk a bit more about the practical considerations when developing a strategic plan.
Thanks, Connie. So, in terms of this agenda, let's talk a little bit about, let's build a little bit about, build a bit on what Corrine and Connie said. Corrine mentioned a strategic vision for the organization. When you set up your planning session, and this could be before the interviews that you do in the community, it could be independent of the interviews, especially if you're doing an update for the strategic plan, it could be after them. It kind of depends on how you're doing this. When boards think about a strategic planning session, generally they're thinking about putting together a retreat for a board. Sometimes that means they forget to think about staff. Let's talk about including staff in this process. One of the benefits of doing strategic planning, aside from getting this pretty plan put together, is getting everybody in your organization on the same page. The staff, assuming you have staff, so some organizations are small and they're just boards, so that's a whole different thing. But assuming you have staff, the staff are going to be the folks who are going to be implementing these strategic things that you're putting down. I get some pushback from boards saying it's our job to do strategy, it's the staff's job to implement. True. However, if you're doing some top-down work and you're asking the staff to do things that have been decided by the board without any staff input, it's very difficult. So getting buy-in from the staff and having them involved in the process at the beginning is incredibly important. And I think that includes having them at this planning session. Now, if you're a large organization, that's not maybe practical. So you at least have your executive director there who may have done some prior work with a group of staff members that person will then bring to this session. One of the other things that was talked about was strategic vision. So at the beginning of a session like this, you're going to be doing mission, vision, values. You're going to think about this session as you're first going to talk about who are we? That can also be where are we in terms of our journey as a nonprofit organization? Who and where do we want to be? And what is it going to take to get there? So that's the resources that Connie mentioned in terms of people, time, budget. So we'll talk about a little bit of that. But who are we? This is a really great time to either start or re-look at your mission statement. I just did a strategy session for America 250, which is the celebration, commemoration of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And Chester County has put together a commission to make that happen within the county. So we were looking at putting together a mission statement for the commission itself. In terms of that, all the discussion went to who are we and what's our goal in terms of reaching out to the community and what it's going to take to get there. So there was a lot of discussion about time, people, and budget in terms of that. Values. I think it's really important to take some of this time to talk about what are the values of the organization, especially if you're at a point where the organization is growing and you know you're going to be bringing on new staff members, you know you're going to be, perhaps you're doing a session like this internally and you have not yet engaged an outside strategic planning consultant. You want to be bringing somebody on, like Connie mentioned, that is familiar with the size of your organization and perhaps the type of organization that you are. So think about your core values. What are they? And you can do a brainstorming list with the group that you have. What are the values? Why do we operate and how do we operate? I work with a lot of small rare disease organizations, and doing this kind of process with them is fascinating because they usually have people who started the organization to do research. As these organizations grow, they might want to do advocacy for the family members they're serving as well. There's often a lot of pushback in terms of who are we? You have to get the basics down first and get everybody on the same page in terms of who are we and where do we want to go from here before you can put a plan like this together. Sometimes the board might be operating thinking everybody is on the same page. And so getting the staff members involved is a really important step because that's not always the case. In terms of putting together the design of the organization, the design of the plan, again, to what ends are we working? What difference do we want to make by having the organization? What difference do we want to make, and how do we put those steps together to make that happen? Then you want to look at what's going on in the world. So external trends, that could be, how has COVID affected the organization? How have we changed how we're operating because of these things? The other piece of that is looking at, what are your partners doing? How are you don't operate in a vacuum. So I'll take Good Fellowship as an example. They have hospitals closing in all of Chester County. That's really impacting how the ambulance organizations are working throughout the county. What is that doing? So how are those changes impacting your organization? Those are other organizations, but they have impacts for you. So looking at what the economic external impact is, what the partnership impact is, that's really important. Some of that is going to inform who you reach out to do those external interviews. If you've already done some of those external interviews, some of those responses will inform this session. And then you're going to look at your internal organization. What are your strengths? What are your challenges? Are you in a position where you are in a transition point? So you're either looking at, say you've lost your executive director, and you're looking at what kind of person, based on the values and the mission and where we want to go, are we looking for? Or you are looking to expand, and you might be looking for your first building. You're looking at what are the needs and the capacity for that. As you're looking at all of this, capacity is really important. So you don't want to create a pretty plan that's very far reaching if you don't have the capacity to make that happen. And that's three different things. So think about resources as people, time, and money. So when you're putting the plan together, and as Connie showed you in terms of the action steps, you want to make sure that you have enough people to make those things happen. Those people have enough time to make those things happen. And you have whatever budget is needed to make those things happen. So if you're not putting a plan together that has budgetary implications put into it, it's not useful, because you don't know. Let's think about this as levels. The organization creates a strategic plan. They review it every year. Based on what you've decided you wanted to do in year one, then the organization creates the budget for that year. Based on that, then you might create your development plan, which next month, Corinne and I will talk about creating. But it's levels. You have to have the basics down first. Who are we and where do we want to go? And what's it going to take to get there? So you create your budget based on what you've decided you want to do in the next year with your strategic plan. In terms of next planning steps, again, the fiscal year's budget review. Do we have enough capacity to make what we've decided we want to do happen? If not, what's that going to take? Is it going to take hiring a couple new people? Is it going to take doing some external partnerships? Is it going to take seeking funding somewhere for pieces of this? How do we need to modify what we're currently doing to make that happen? And again, as both Corinne and Connie mentioned, this is an evergreen document. This is a living document that you're going to have a pretty document that you're going to send to funders. That's going to change. So you don't want to think of it as some sort of thing that sits on a shelf or in a computer. You want to make sure that you are working with it and it's something that you can work with. One of the things that I do when I work with organizations is I help them create the outline for the implementation plan. So you might have this pretty document, and then next to it is your Excel spreadsheet. That is what are we doing this year? Who's responsible for it? What are the budgetary implications for that? And that's the piece that staff or board take and they look at every quarter, every year, whatever it is. You're making sure that it's something that you can physically work with and change all of the time. Okay, let's go to the next one, Connie. Okay, and again, what is motivating our nonprofit to plan? So sometimes nonprofits just say, okay, well, we're done, our strategic plan has expired, because you usually do it between 1 and 5 years, depending on 5 years is really rare nowadays because things change so quickly. So say you're doing a 3-year plan. Maybe your nonprofit just says, okay, well, it's time to update that. That's fine. But sometimes it's something big that's happened. Sometimes it's something like, again, you've decided you've outgrown your space and you need a new one, or some big change has happened and you need to do a plan. So what is motivating your nonprofit to make this plan? And then how much time do you think you're going to require to do the planning itself? That means if you decide you're only going to do a planning session and you're going to do an update from that planning session, that probably is not going to take as long as doing a complete overhaul or doing your very first strategic plan. But I'm probably thinking that you're going to be looking at 2 to 3 months. Corinne or Connie, if you have any input into that particular time frame, go ahead and let me know. But that's kind of what I usually tell folks when they say, how long is this going to take?
Yeah, I would say it is usually at least 2 to 3 months. It depends on how complicated your organization is, how much you have going on. And it also depends on what an organization's process is. I find when I work with some organizations, things just move right along because that's sort of how they operate. And other organizations are much more deliberate, and there's, as an outside consultant, there's a limit to how much you can control how long things happen if the people in the organization are sort of going at this very thoughtful, deliberative pace. And those can take 6 and 8 months, it just really depends.
Right.
But I would agree with what each of you have said, Connie and Chris, and that is, don't elongate the process. Try to make it efficient and interesting and fun and engaging. Because when people lose interest, the plan is not as vibrant as it could be.
Right. And again, in terms of who to involve, certainly your board, certainly senior staff and program staff, your constituents. So you really want to, this is a great time to get some of your major donors involved without asking them for money. So people really love to be asked for advice. So make sure that you're asking some of your major donors to be part of this community interview process. The other is external community partners. So who are your current partners that really their work impacts what you do? And who do you think some of your partners might be in the future? Also reach out to them and see what they're thinking about what you're doing. It's really an interesting process to get a better idea of how the community sees you and your work and how you fit in with the overarching work that the community itself does. So this can be a very valuable thing. Not only does it sort of raise your visibility within the community, but it helps you have an idea of how other folks see you, which might impact some of that marketing piece of the strategic plan. The value add of hiring a consultant. I really would encourage you, even if you have somebody on your board who does this for a living, I would really encourage you to have a consultant for at least part of it. So say you have somebody on your board who says, nope, I can do this. I can put this plan together. I would still encourage you to have someone external doing the community interviews. I would have somebody external come in and do the day-long retreat for you, because they have a different viewpoint than somebody who's in the weeds. And you might think that as a board member, you're not in the weeds, but you have very definite ideas. Your board has very definite ideas of who you are and who you want to be that might not necessarily mesh with some of those things that you'll get from having an outside view of it. And it also is really good in terms of making sure that the community partners are giving you honest feedback, to have an outside person say, hi, I'm doing this plan for the organization. Now the organization's going to set this up. So they'll set up the consultant and they'll do the contacts for you. But you have this person coming in who has no affiliation with the organization, who is going to say, okay, I'm going to give the feedback to the organization, but we'll have no names attached. So you'll get some more honest feedback from the community that way. So I would encourage that. Now, at what cost? Again, this is going to depend on how complex your organization is, how big it is, what life stage you're at. So we're talking something from anywhere from between 5,000 for an update to 100,000 for something like a hospital system, where it might be a year-long process with a lot of different moving pieces. Everywhere in between. A lot of the organizations, that are sort of small to mid-size that I work with, it might be for a full process somewhere between $12,000 to $20,000. It depends on the size of the organization and how complex, but that's a whole thing. There's also, how much does it cost to do a one-day workshop? Well, I think it depends on the consultant that you reach out to, but anywhere from, $1,200 to $3,000. I think it really depends. And again, there are a lot of factors that add into that, but it really depends on the size and the complexity of your organization. But the value added, I think, really has a lot to do with the fact that you're bringing in somebody who can have different eyes on what you're doing. How will we communicate the final plan to the public? As you're doing this process, you always should be putting some sort of marketing piece into this, in terms of how are you going to let the public know that you've done this, and are you going to put the top strategy goals on your website? Are you going to be sending this out to funders saying, hey, we've done this? What are you going to be doing in terms of communicating that you now have a vision for the next few years? And when can the nonprofit readily commit the time and the funds? So when do you do the planning? A lot of times I work with organizations who have had a funder fund this process.
Mhm.
So if you're an organization who's small and you say, I absolutely need to get this done, but I don't think I can commit either the time or the funds for it, one of the things that you can do is reach out to some of your prior donors and say, look, I need to get this done. Is this something you'd be willing to fund? I think at this point, we're going to open this up for questions, unless Connie or Corinne, you have some, final things that you'd like to say before we do that.
No? Are there any questions anybody has at this point?
I've got one.
Yeah.
So when you're communicating to the public, you mentioned about putting some of the big picture bullet points on the website. What about on Candid? Do you put the whole schmear on with the action plan, without the action plan? Do you put just the high level bullet points? What's the best thing to do on candid.org?
Well, I would suggest that when you complete the strategic plan, you do an executive summary, or you have your consultant provide an executive summary, which really highlights the goals that you want to achieve over the time frame. They don't need a lot of information. In fact, it's probably in your best interest not to publicize all of the internals, comings and goings, because that's going to change over time. So stick to what's really important, the highlights, the achievable goals, and the time frame, the mission, the values, and that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Lynn. I would also like to include a little bit of a summary about what the process of developing the plan was, because that shows, again, it wasn't just like we went out to lunch and did our plan. You know, there were 3 people did it. We went and had drinks and there it is. You know, it shows the process and it shows how inclusive it is. I think that can be helpful too. And you can use that executive summary, as Corinne suggested, also with, you know, when funders want strategic plans, you just give them the executive summary, or you can put that on your website as well.
And how long is a typical executive summary? We just finished our strategic plan that took many, many, many months, and as well as you know, the action plan and timelines and who's doing what to whom. So how long should this executive summary be?
So honestly, when I do plans, I do a 1-page at the front of the plan that talks about the process, that gives the mission, vision, values, and then it gives the bullet pointed high level strategies. No detail in terms of that, but usually just that 1 page. And that's what I recommend sending to funders and publicizing. Because again, as Connie said, they don't need to know all the internal detail because that's going to change. But generally your high level strategies are the things that you're going to work on. They might change over the next year or 2, but it's mostly the inside stuff that's going to change.
You know, Lynn, I also think that the summary, the executive summary, is a really important fundraising tool. So I would be sure to include the mission and the vision, as well as the main points, so that potential donors, institutional as well as individual donors, really get a sense that this has been well thought out, that the programs reflect the vision and the vision reflects the mission of the organization.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, just to add on another level of that, you know, the summaries that I tend to do are more than 1 page. But it all depends on what your inclination is, what works for you. I often like to include information about, for funders, or in this summary, as a result of doing this plan, what do we anticipate is going to change? So we're sort of also addressing outcomes. So as a result of implementing these 5 initiatives in the fundraising section, let's just say, what's going to be the outcome of that? How's that going to impact an organization? So you can, you know, be flexible about however much information you feel is important. And that may vary depending on where you are, where your organization is also, and what you're anticipating.
Right.
Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question not related to strategic plans, so let me know when the appropriate time is for that.
I would say go for it.
Okay, so when I registered, you know, you could put a place for a question. So my question is, what if you have a board member who is like a bump on a log and they're not doing anything, and actually they are part of the strategic plan, but let's say they didn't log on to the website and their email for over a year. Yes, believe it or not. What do you do to sort of start the process of suggesting that maybe this is not the best fit? And do you have any verbiage that you can share that needs to go and be part of the bylaws? And the reason, you know, I'm definitely here today is to see if I can get an answer to this, because I have a board meeting on Thursday.
Okay, so we better get right to that.
Yep. Don, it looked to me like you had an answer. Do you have an answer to that question, Don?
No, I've decided I am the bump. I'm
Lynn, I think with respect to the bump, I'd go back to the bylaws and work there. And the bylaws should articulate very clearly what is expected of each board member who is going to serve on the board. And that includes term limits, number of committees they serve on, number of meetings that they should attend, amount of money that they should be willing to give or help raise. Because the more specific we can be with board members about what we anticipate from them, what we expect from them, the better the results will be. And I would bet you that Chris and Connie will agree with me that uniformly we see organizations with board members who really have no idea what it is they're supposed to do.
Right.
And-
So I would add on to that, Corinne, that after you look at the bylaws, you then develop, if you do not have one, a board job description that
Absolutely.
matches the bylaws exactly. Because I've run into that before. People develop these pretty job descriptions that don't match what it says in the bylaws in terms of what the board's supposed to be doing. But you create a board job description, and that's how you do recruitment of the board. So you're not doing any sort of bait and switch in terms of, as you're bringing people on, they know what is expected of them. Then I would institute a process of every year, the board members do a board self-evaluation. So they're really looking at themselves. And when they complete that evaluation, it does give the board chair or the governance chair a time and a process to have an individual conversation with that board member. But it has to be based off of something. So if you don't have a board job description, look at what your bylaws say and create one.
Yeah, it's a really good example of a situation where having that policy is going to save you.
Yeah.
I mean, we often think we are real advocates of all kinds of policies, you know, confidentiality, conflict of interest, all non-discrimination, all of that. And, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, ho hum, here we go, the policy mongers, let's do another policy. That's spicy. But, you know, but this is a situation, those policies can really, really save you. And this is also a situation where the board chair ideally will have the conversation with the board member and say, you know, we need your seat for somebody else, or what's going on, or have that conversation. But it's always amazing how difficult that concept is for some people, because we want to be nice.
Yeah. And you don't want to be in that conversation, Lynn. You want to push the board chair or the board executive committee to make these decisions, make and enforce these decisions, because it's peer-to-peer, as Connie said. Very important.
Yeah. Well, that's all fine and well, but when that person is responsible for updating and writing roles and responsibilities and updating the policies, it's a problem when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I had to move things forward, so we're with Catch a Fire, so I had a couple amazing volunteers, you know, help with that stuff. But you know, there's been no action or movement, and I'm kind of at wit's end. So
Lynn, do you have any periodic or regular board training sessions or annual board training sessions that at that point in time, and working with the chair of the board, being able to raise some important issues like involvement, things like that? I mean, that's a great excuse to get that message directed to board members about their duties and their obligations.
we have a very small board. We have a monthly board meeting, and every board meeting I offer to have a one-on-one, hold hands for technology, you know, for Google Docs, which to me is simpler than a Word document. But you know, if you don't know how to enter an email and a password to get in to the Google Drive via an email, I just don't know. I just banging head on wall.
Well,
So
that
you
might
just-
be one of the things that you include in the job description for
Yes.
board members too.
And
It's
you need
there.
to team up with your chair and really address that issue.
Yeah, assign every board member a 14-year-old to, you know,
Yeah,
I love
that's
it.
so practical. I love that.
I
Yes.
got in trouble with the Red Cross suggesting that one day. It was a bad idea. Actually, what I raised my hand just for a minute is that because last year, a couple of us went to the foundation's Board of Directors Institute, we have now created a governance committee
Yes.
and started to write a charter to charge said committee with care and feeding of the board.
Yep.
You know, going forward, promotions, all those things that are supposed to be in there. It's one more committee, but it is kind of an important committee.
Kind of, yeah.
If
It's
you could,
extremely.
don't have one and you could add the concept, you at least would share the responsibility for making decisions around board conduct with more than one person.
Right.
Lynn,
So
you might also
is
look at
that-
BoardSource, because boardsource.com or .org has some great templates for board job descriptions and other
Yeah.
things.
Oh, we have them. I mean, I was adopted by a change management master's degree class at Immaculata University, which helped write all those board descriptions and our bylaws and all that. It was a terrific experience. But you know, I'm in a bit of a pickle and a quandary. That every time that the Chester County Community Foundation has had that meeting, I've never been able to attend. Like, I'm so busy, I have to plan way in advance. Do you have this year's dates sorted out yet?
I don't think so.
Yesterday and not yet.
I'll
Not yet.
check. I'll
Yeah.
check it. Lynn, if I can find something, I'll let you know.
Okay, I think it's 1 o'clock, correct? Are we at the end of our time, unfortunately? All right, so thank you everyone for coming. I hope maybe we've given you a couple tidbits of new information or inspiring information about strategic planning. And hope you will tune in next month for, is it development plans? Is that what you guys are doing?
Yeah.
Next
we're
month?
creating a
Develop- Development plans. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Connie.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye now.